Alright everybody, welcome back. We are going to be finally working on the Mark IV yet again. It's been a really long time since we touched this. Between the hiatus of not doing anything on YouTube, getting ready for the wedding, I didn't work on anything even off YouTube. So this is really just sat since the last time that we worked on it. The engine is still sitting back there on the stand. The transmission's behind the car. We really haven't done anything on this, so we need to start working on getting the manual swap done. So the plan for today's episode is to work on getting the automatic shifter out of the car and get the manual gear selector in it. So by the end of this, hopefully this will be out of the way, dropped out, and we'll have, a manual 5-speed gear selector in there. So we got to get the shift lock out of it, which is the cable there that, when you're in park, it lets you remove the key. When you're in, any other gear, it doesn't let you remove the key. So we got to work on pulling that. Then once we get that done, the next thing that we'll do towards the end of this episode is we're going to pull the subframe out of it. So the reason behind pulling the subframe is really two things. So one, I bought H&R sway bars to put in this instead of the factory sway bar. So you need to pull the subframe out to be able to put that on it. Two, I'm gonna make my own aluminum subframe bushings and replace the factory rubber ones. So that's why subframe has to drop now. I'm probably gonna leave the steering rack in it. I'll just take the brackets off and let it hang. That way I don't have to disconnect any of that stuff. I can reconnect it when I put it back in the car. But I'm gonna have to unbolt the control arms on both sides. Hope that the nuts don't break off inside the subframe and have to deal with that. Fingers crossed we won't. But yeah, that's the plan. We'll see how quickly it goes. If it goes quicker than I expect, maybe we'll get to a third task, but for sure we're gonna do those two things. So with that, I'm gonna set you guys up inside the car so you can watch what I'm doing and get digging into this thing. So hopefully taking the shifter out of this won't be too hard. It doesn't seem like it will be, but we'll find out. Not many people work on automatics, so let's get moving. Thankfully, having a quick disconnect steering wheel makes it a little bit easier to start taking the steering column clamshell off, but doing work under the dash still sucks no matter what. There's just no comfortable way to lay in the floor of a car, so I ended up doing a lot of stuff blindly on feel rather than laying in the floor and actually being able to see what I'm doing. To get access to the ignition lock, we have to take the steering column clamshell off, as well as the handle that locks the steering column into place. And then after we do all that, that'll get us access to the top half of the lock cable. It took a decent bit of prying and moving to get the clamshell around the actual ignition switch. Then from there, it's just prying the cable end out of the lock. Also, if anyone has suggestions for better camera angles for this stuff, leave a comment. I think I might try suction cupping the camera up to the sunroof for the next time I do interior videos. That way, hopefully, you guys won't have to stare at my shoulder as much as what you are in these clips. But once the cable was loose, I took the plastic paneling off the lower dash so I had access to pull the cable out of the dash. Then I can move on to working to get the other end of the cable free. The center console has been out of this car for a long time, so those steps got skipped, obviously. It's just a 10mm bolt that holds the end of the cable into the shift box, and with that removed, I can pry the cable end off of the shift box, and all we're left to do is fish this cable out of the dash. With the cable out of the dash, it's now time to pull the actual shifter out. So you have to pop the shift knob off, which is just sliding the silver collar down and pulling up on the knob. And that'll get the actual shift handle off. I accidentally removed the chrome surround in this clip, which you don't actually need to do, but there's just 4 tight-fitting clips around the perimeter of the shift box that you pop off, and then 1 harness connection, and that pops the entire top of the shifter off. The connector on the side doesn't really have great finger access, so you may need to use a screwdriver or pliers to pull that out. But with all that done, we can now move on to dropping the shifter out of the car. So now with everything wrapped up that we can do in the car, we've got the actual shift knob taken off, the actual cassette that covers like the shifter is off, and we've disconnected the wire harness. So now we've done everything in the car. Oh, and we pulled the whole shift lock cable out. So now that we've done everything in the car, it's time to go underneath it, and we're gonna have to take off the exhaust because when I pulled the motor, I left the basically the mid pipe, I guess you call it, down what runs down the center of the car. I left that in, which obviously the shifter is above that. So we're gonna have to take that exhaust pipe out and then drop the heat shield, and then it should just be coming back up here and pulling these 4 nuts out, and this should just drop right out the bottom. And that'll make this one pretty easy. And then we got the other shift box to put in. So now let's go crawl around on the floor and get underneath this thing. To drop the shift box out of the car, I've got to remove the mid pipe from the exhaust and then take some heat shields out of the way. Removing the mid pipe isn't hard. It's just removing the V-band on my exhaust and then taking this cross member off the car. When I was doing this, I really didn't think about how heavy this entire thing was going to be before I unbolted it, because as you'll see, I kind of just let it fall right onto the floor when I only had 1 nut left holding it on. But with that out, it's time to get the heat shield out of the way. VW uses these really weird flat washer type things to hold heat shields on, and I've really never found a great way to remove them beyond just like sitting there with a screwdriver and prying them off. So I just struggle with getting these to start rotating and then finally spin them off the studs. I'd really love to see how VW actually installs these when they put them on the car at the factory, but there's like 6 or 8 of them holding this heat shield on, and then I can rip it off, and that gets us access to the actual shifter itself. To drop the shifter out, it's just 2 bolts from the bottom of the car and then 2 nuts inside the car, and then you can just drop the shifter right out onto the floor through the bottom of the car. Installing the new shift box for the manual is just the same steps in the reverse order. Also, I hope you guys enjoy me sitting in the driver's seat and pretending like I can actually shift this car for once, now that I have a shifter back in the car. I left all the bolts loose for now, but I'll go back and torque them. But I want it to move on to dropping the subframe out of the car. So first thing that needs to come off to start working on that is the control arms. So I disconnected the sway bar bolts from the control arms and then worked on the 2 bolts that hold the control arms to the actual subframe. I always get nervous doing these bolts because Mark IVs have an inherent issue with these bolts. The front bolt on the control arm threads into a nut that's welded to the inside of the subframe. Over time, as things corrode, that welded on nut breaks free, and then you basically have to cut open your subframe like a soup can to repair it. So whenever I'm doing this, I'm always nervous that that bolt's gonna spin and I'm gonna have to cut it open. but thankfully it went smooth this time. I still just get nervous every time that I have to take those bolts out. And then the other thing that needs to be disconnected is the steering rack, which is just 4 bolts from the bottom of the subframe. And then we can move on to actually unbolting the subframe from the car. The bolts that hold the subframe to the actual car are super tight, like tight to the point that it makes you nervous. But they actually came out pretty well, and then I just had to wrestle the subframe out of the car. If I was doing this over again, I probably would have taken the time to pull the control arms out of the subframe first, instead of trying to just pull the subframe and hope that the control arms, fell out of the sides of the subframe nicely. But live and learn. If I'm ever doing this again, I know what not to do. The only issue that I had with pulling the subframe is that there is a vacuum pump mounted on the subframe, and I forgot to unbolt that. It's only on certain model years of automatics that vacuum pump exists, and I really can't find a straight answer on what the purpose of it is. But seeing that we're going to a manual transmission and swapping everything over, I'm just going to get rid of that pump completely, and then I don't have to worry about it in the future. But that's really the only thing that I forgot going through this. So now we finally got the subframe out of the car, sitting down right there. So now, with this in this state, we're going to take the sway bar off. This is going in the trash. We have an H&R sway bar to put on, and we're also going to make our own adjustable sway bar end links to replace these, so we don't need those either. And then I got to figure out how I'm going to press these out, because they're rather large, and nothing about this subframe is flat. So I'm gonna have to figure that out. But before we get to doing that, I'm gonna spend some time cleaning that up, because it's covered in CV axle grease because I blew an axle boot. But yeah. Then once we get the bushings out, sorry, I'm gonna stand in the garage for a little bit. It's a sunny, beautiful day here for once. But once we get the subframe bushings out, I'm gonna do some measurements, make aluminum versions, press the aluminum ones in, put the new H&R sway bar on, and then we'll be ready to put this subframe back in the car. The other thing that we're gonna do while the subframe is out is we're gonna make this as a solid mount. So this is the steering rack bushing. So the steering rack mounts to the subframe with 4 bolts. This, which is a cast part of the actual rack itself, and then this guy slides on over here. It would go over top of, that cleanest section. So we're gonna make one of these out of aluminum and make it solid, and not have this floppy, ugly bushing in there anymore. And hopefully that'll gain us some hopefully that'll gain us some steering response a little bit, take some slop out of it. We'll see how it goes. I'm probably gonna have to order material to be able to make this as well, but I think it'll be a fun project. So to summarize a little bit, we have 3 things to make. So one being the subframe bushings themselves. The second being sway bar end links, which is less of a priority because I don't need those to put the subframe back into the car. And then the third one being that steering rack mount, basically, making that solid. So the priorities are obviously subframe bushings and the steering rack mount. Those need to be done before I can go put this subframe back in the car. So that's what we're gonna work on. Now it's time to get moving, clean this up a little bit so I can stop getting my hands disgusting with grease. So let's do it. Taking the bushings out of the subframe did not go as planned at all. It wasn't hard to do. It's just like the size of the subframe does not fit into my press very nicely at all. So first plan, I tried to press them. I had footage of that. It was not good. Not good at all. So second plan was I just took a hammer to them. And I literally pounded the like aluminum center of the bushing out, and then from there used screwdrivers to pry the rubber part out of it. So now we have the subframe, no bushings, and I need to machine aluminum bushings to put in there. But that's not gonna get done in this video, so I'm gonna cut it off here. And we'll have another video once I make the aluminum subframe bushings. Have another video of putting those in and putting this back in the car. Because the other part of this, for a little bit of a life update, I got a new job. And that new job is a decent distance away from where I live right now. It's commutable, but it's not a fun commute by any means. So because of that, I now need to get the cars that are not moving in the garage, meaning the Mark II that's sitting here, and the Mark IV. I need to get both of those in a state that they'll at least roll, because I can push them onto a trailer. But right now, I can't do that. So moving forward, it's going to be a mad dash to get the transmission in the Mark II to a state that it can at least go back in the car, take that engine support bar out, close the hood, push it on a trailer, take care of it at the new house, whenever that may be. And then the Mark IV, put the subframe back in it. We can put the motor in without the turbo hanging off the back of it. Put the motor in, put the axles back in it, roll that onto a trailer, and take it back apart when I get to the new house, whatever that may be. So that's going to be what the next couple of videos are. So definitely the next one will be Mark II transmission, and then the one after that will be whatever it takes to get the Mark IV back together, and then hopefully the one after that will be a garage tour at the new house, and we can see how much of an upgrade I may or may not have from what I work with now. But yeah, I'm rambling now about just life. So with that, thank you for watching. Thank you for subscribing. Look forward to the next few videos, and we'll see everybody next time. So see you.